Good evening. My name is Angela Pinalia. I'm the Artistic Director for Docs in Progress. Thanks for joining us. Well, in addition to this being seen on Eventive, I just got to say this one note because we're also doing a live stream on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you've stumbled upon this and you're wondering, what is this? Well, this is a Q&A with the filmmaker Jan Haaken for the documentary Our Bodies, Our Doctors, which is still available to see until tomorrow. So if you haven't seen it yet, go to our website, docsinprogress.org/screenings for more information. If this is your first time at a Docs in Progress event, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Before we get started, there's a chat box. Please feel free to add comments, questions. We definitely want this to be a conversation, not just with me and Jan, but with you as well. We have an initiative called Dinner in a Doc, which is basically a community effort to support local restaurants. And at every one of our screenings, we give away a gift certificate. This month, we're giving away a $25 gift certificate to Spice Street in downtown Silver Spring, Maryland. And thank you to Navjot Singh for donating that. So at the end of the Q&A, which will be about 30 minutes from now, we'll be giving away one of these. So stick around to see if you won. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started and bring on the director, Jan Haaken. Hi, Jan.
Hi, thanks for having me part of this.
Of course. And just real quick, I'm just going to say a little bit about you. Jan's Professor Emeritus of Psychology at Portland State University. She's a clinical psychologist and a documentary filmmaker. From refugee camps, war zones, and mental hospitals to drag bars, dairy farms, and hip-hop clubs, her documentaries focus on people and places on the social margins and difficult jobs that become the focus of public anxiety. Our Bodies, Our Doctors was your 6th film, which you've made another one since then. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So my first question is, this is such a complex, complicated topic, subject. How did you come to it and how did you make this film?
Well, initially I was invited by faculty at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, who had been carrying out research for about a decade in a project called Providers Share, looking at abortion providers around the world and how they confronted stigma, abortion stigma, and prejudices against their work in their communities. And they were interested in taking some of the findings of that research into the medium of a documentary. And the thinking was that there was an academic literature on this topic, but a lot of visual culture is dominated by anti-abortion imagery. And even though abortion has come out from the back alleys of the culture, it's still kind of in the back doors visually of the culture in terms of what this work is about. And so after making 2 films for them, one set in Kenya called Kwepo and another set here in Oregon called Being There. Both of them are available, short films. You can watch them for free. Watch them, you can find them on my website. I became really interested in the providers and a larger story of how people do this work and how they navigate the enormous pressures they're under and the prejudices in the medical field itself. I think a lot of the films on abortion rights focus on like the crazy preachers out there, the streets with the placards with the bloody fetuses, but very little on the way in which abortion providers in the field of medicine and the Catholic hospitals, the role of bishops in restricting this kind of care, how they confront the stigma they face, and that their story hadn't been told. And so I was also very interested in abortion care as a form of work and a form of, reproductive labor that we all depend on them being there. So that term being there was part of this focus on people who are there for us in a time of of need, there for women in a time of need, and how the work, how they understand the work from their point of view.
Hmm. Well, I think one of the other immediate questions I had was, obviously you built relationships and you gain the trust of these providers because, we know that there's inherent danger in what they do. And for them to so publicly come on camera with their full name, where they live, right? Like, wow, like, can you talk about building that relationship and maintaining that trust and not just once the film is ended, because obviously the film's still available, right? So it's like a relationship that continues. Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, I think part of it was I'm an academic, and so I bring a perspective that is very careful around, I avoid sensationalized stories or highly dramatic stories and try to bring the complexity of the lived experience of people to this medium. And I'm also an activist. I worked in an abortion clinic in Los Angeles when I was in graduate school. My first career was as a nurse, and I worked in that area. So I think it mattered that I had that kind of background. I've worked in hospital settings. I knew HIPAA rules, which have to do with how you negotiate consent for patients in hospital settings. And often people don't realize that rules around confidentiality also extend to patients having the right to tell their stories, and to have a media presence if they also understand that their choice to be part of the film won't affect the care they have available. So I think in addition to the background I brought to this, many of the providers felt very inhibited by some of the mainline arguments in the pro-choice movement that didn't allow for the complexity of abortion, didn't allow for the complexity of the work itself. So that was an important part of their wanting to participate, to tell a fuller story that addresses some of the ambivalence that many people have around abortion procedures, particularly around second-term abortions. Right. And it was important for them not to pull away from this area of life, because like any area of important human concern, there are complex emotions that arise. There are decisions to be made that are not easy for people, though for some people they are. So I think that was a very important part of being being part of this. And there was also a whole methodology I work with that involved showing work samples to the clinic providers, and so they could see as I moved along, what the material I was showing. So there's a kind of ongoing it's called participatory action methods that I use in this project. So when people see the film on the screen, they're not like surprised by what they see. They know where I'm going with this. Gotcha.
Well, I think it's so clear, right, that you had that trust. And to me, like the film, I keep saying it's complex, but I feel like there's so many angles, right? Like you're covering like a lot of information. Like, you start with the oral arguments of Roe v. Wade. We do some history with our bodies, ourselves, right? Like, oh yeah, we're with the Janes. Like there's just so much. And then we're still connected very much in the present, right? And there's this like generational aspect to it. Like we're there in the past, we're here and almost connecting us to the future. And to me, it just felt so like, these are facts, right? Like it's not sensationalized, right? You treated this very fairly, this topic, and presented it, as this is what it is. Mm-hmm. But I am curious about how you came to, your decision to try to weave all this multi-generational, like look at, the topic.
Yeah, I'm glad you noticed that theme, because a lot of my work takes up intergenerational relationships and forms of work that are not only important for the skills and training involved, but how you transmit ways of understanding work and controversies around particular kinds of work to the next generation. And it was interesting following these doctors. Many of them work in medical centers, work with students who are trying to decide, do they want to do this or not? And is it scary? What are the dangers they face? And, the doctors tended to emphasize both how you can, in general, this is a safe area of practice. What the risks tend to be more putting up with a lot of harassment, including from the medical profession itself, but how these providers also form alliances with other people who do this work. So for me, I wanted to depart from the conventional hero narrative that we're all familiar with. As filmmakers, there's a person who confronts a challenge. They have a test of character of some kind. Then they successfully manage that test, and then they triumph in some way, or perhaps are tragically defeated. For me, I'm interested in groups and how people come together to do difficult work. So there's a lot of emphasis on people working in these clinics together, how they form relationships that kind of fortify them in being able to weather what comes their way. It's not just a heroic individual, it's people coming together out of shared commitments that sustains them, and that's part of what they transmit to younger people coming into this field, is that sense of a certain camaraderie that's palpable in these clinics. And these are also feminist clinics. These were not Planned Parenthood clinics, which I think people are most familiar with. These are all independent feminist clinics around the country that I think are often neglected in the focus on Planned Parenthood that is so often targeted. But these are typically freestanding clinics that have been both the focus of violence and attacks, particularly in the 90s. Many people murdered, doctors murdered, and clinics suffering bombings and forms of violence. But they also became these sites of experimenting with models of healthcare and feminist approaches to healthcare. So it's not only about access to abortion, it's a kind of approach to the body, to healthcare, to ways of thinking about reproductive healthcare as part of life in a broader way than I think abortion is typically portrayed.
Definitely, because like we even saw the scene where there was a baby, there's a live birth in the film, and going back to the you just sense there was a sense of community in those clinics and kindness, right, and humanity, and that really came through. So we've got a couple questions, so I'm going to pause my lines of questions here to bring these up. So Greg has asked, well, first his comment is, it's a beautiful film, and he wants to know, did you ask patients to be interviewed or demonstrators to visit the clinics like the friendly demonstrator? Actually, I'm not sure that I understand that. Did you understand that question, Jan?
Well, the first part, when I visited clinics, there were flyers in the lobby, and patients were invited to be part of the film if they chose to. There were 9 or 10 women who offered to have the film crew there and film their procedure. They were told their rights to do it, but also their rights to decline. And that was a very moving part of this project. The number of women who you would think would not want a camera crew. Sometimes we had 2 cameras in the room and lighting, and that it was a big ask. But the ones who chose to be part of this wanted to give something back to providers who were there for them, and it was their way of expressing a certain gratitude, knowing that their faces wouldn't be recognized, that it was really about the providers and showing the work itself. I think the friendly demonstrator, I don't know if that was sarcastic, but whether that was, there was someone out in front of one of the Seattle clinics every morning with
right.
a big placard with a bloody fetus on it, and we did not get that person's permission. You don't need to when you're filming someone out in a public space who has a sign. They're expecting the sign to be visible. It was really about from the perspective of people who do this work. It was not a film that took up the anti-abortion forces, but they were often there outside, of course.
Right. Thank you. We also have a question from Barbara. She's got a two-parter. She says, first part, how hard was it to have women agree to participate as they have the procedure? So I think this builds on what you talked about and like the challenge of that, right? Like, I know obviously you've got to approach the provider, find the patients, clear, just go through, explain the process. Did they also see work in progress, like, versions of the film?
Well, they could agree to be part of a mailing list to be informed about the project. They signed a consent explaining what the film was about. Even the woman who had a baby, a birth, that was, we wanted to show the continuum of reproductive health care, and kind of emphasize that many of the people who deliver babies also help women end pregnancies or people end pregnancies. And so that was important to include for me to have a birth.
Right.
And many of the women who have abortions also have babies and have children. And so the separation of abortion from maternity was something we were challenging itself in the film. But, I think it's in any project, the people who you have the ethical commitment to is how to, like the woman who gave a birth, she was informed that this was a documentary about abortion providers. So she knew that her birth scene would be part of a film about abortion providers. But I think the ethical obligations, as well as informing people of their rights and that they have a choice to participate or not, is to the people who are recognized and the abortion providers who do this work every day, and I think the question sometimes comes up, well, why not? Why didn't you follow the people who are having abortions? And there are a number of films about the barriers and dilemmas or the obstacles women have in seeking abortion. But this was really the story of people who do this work. And that's where I felt the obligation over time, because they're visible, they are, identifiable, and that carries a set of, obligations to do it in a way that's faithful to, to how they think about their work. Clearly, as a documentary filmmaker, you have a point of view that is, you're putting things together in a way that conforms to your own vision of the film. But there's also, I think, an ethical obligation to capture a world in a way that feels true to people who participate in it.
Gotcha. So I do want to follow up with Barbara's second question, which she says, if I read the credits correctly, the camera was male. Did that bother the patients, and how did the cameramen respond after the fact?
Gender is one aspect of this. Many of the abortion providers were male, as more more female, but also male. But I think for the crew that included, the sound person was a woman, my assistant is a woman, and I was the one who spoke to the patients. And so there was, I think, a certain trust that the crew would be respectful and, not intrusive, take the cues from me. But that was not an issue that came up for us in the course of filmmaking. I think all of the crew, we would talk ahead of time about how to behave in a clinic. And of course, it's a challenge because you don't want to get in the way, but you kind of have to be in the way. But also, people have their jobs to do every day, and there's a lot of work that has to be carried out. So there's always a dance around that in these kinds of settings that are very intense. And but the camera crew, and each day at the end of a shoot, we would process how people were with their experience that day. There was a lot of footage of fetal parts that we were asked not to show. And that for some people on the crew, that was something they hadn't seen before. And we talked about the experience of why we were there, and that the staff would let us know if we crossed the line. But I think the way that we were present, from the feedback we got, was very respectful of patients and staff.
Gotcha. So, we talked before we came on about who this movie is for. Are we just preaching to the choir? What were your intentions? Did it get out to the people you wanted to get it out to, or is it being used the way you wanted it to be used?
I love that phrase, preaching to the choir, because often I think the choir it sings with too single a note, and isn't. And I think when I came into this project, there was a lot of concern that the pro-choice movement drew too heavily on early terminations, tragic stories to make the case, and that the pro-choice movement had been pretty inhibited around the issues that were taken up. And so, a sizable percentage of Americans who are pro-choice who do support restrictions on abortion, particularly during the second trimester, even though they have no idea what that means. Mm-hmm. Who are the women? About 15% of terminations are during the second trimester. And some are for fetal anomalies, but overwhelmingly they're women who are in very stressful life circumstances. They don't have access to care. Their circumstances are such that it can take a while to make a decision, or things change in their lives. And so the demonizing of women who wait, and in other medical decisions, if you waited 3 or 4 months before you made a medical decision, no one would criticize you. But with an abortion, you come under enormous criticism. And these are primarily women who are poor, who are marginalized, women of color, who have faced enormous obstacles in either deciding or being able to terminate a pregnancy. So we felt that was really important to take up the range of issues that come up and not shy away from it. For some women, it's sad. For others, it's not a big deal, and it's pretty straightforward. Early terminations, surgical abortions take 7 minutes, and people leave and they're fine. But for others, it's a bigger deal. and to acknowledge and kind of hold the range of experiences, I think it's been very important, including what makes it so difficult in the context of a society that makes it difficult to care for the children you have. Mm-hmm. So the reproductive justice theme and our kind of the debt we have to Black feminist thought that brought in reproductive justice as a bigger concept in the 1990s, and wanting to pay tribute to that as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you included that too, because that's where, what I love so much about the film is that there's just so much information, right? Like we're getting it from all angles, which I know I really appreciate and learned a lot. So on that topic, Janet has asked, obviously this movie was made in 2018. So what has changed then, with your people in the film? Are they still teaching, or have laws changed? Did opposition get worse? I know the Supreme Court's hearing something related to this out in the fall. You just give us an update.
Yeah, I think there are more laws being passed, as I think people who follow this, I think in the screen we had something like 250 anti-abortion laws have been passed, probably double that now around the country. In some states like Texas, and places where this fetal heartbeat law has been promoted by state legislatures, making it almost impossible. So the Supreme Court decision is important, obviously, in coming up with a very conservative court. But I also think that in the movement to fight for reproductive rights and reproductive justice, it involves more than preserving Roe v. Wade. That's important, but I think there's a wider struggle around the country in terms of access to health care, making sure that a broad range of people have access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care. So there are, but in terms of the providers in the film, yes, they are mostly still teaching and working, and there's, I think things are getting worse on one level, but there's also, we're living in a period of social movements that now the Hyde Amendment, which the Democrats would pass every year, that would not allow Medicaid funds for abortion other than in extreme situations. Now the Democratic Party has come out more in opposition to that and supporting access to abortion. So there's a polarizing, like so many things we're facing around this. But I think I think many people are understanding that access to abortion is part of a larger struggle for social justice. And so I think we've been able to move away from just isolating abortion as a single procedure, as the way it's been demonized for so long.
Mm-hmm. So, wow, I can't believe 30 minutes already come and gone. So I have like 2 more questions and then we'll start wrapping up. So I think from a filmmaker perspective, it's a challenge to make a film for many things. And then obviously there's a personal takeaway. So, you walk away with the gift of having made the film. For you, what's like the best part of having made this film? What, keeps you going to make the next?
Yeah, I feel it was an honor to be able to enter these clinic spaces and the workspaces of abortion providers who have been so demonized, and in the medical profession have been isolated a lot, but they have also fought for gains. So what I think people are often not aware of how Medical Students for Choice. Many of these doctors came out of that organization, and other allied professions in the field have been able to push for abortion training as an expected part of OBGYN training, as opposed to something you have to opt in. You have to opt out. There's a big difference there. So there are gains that I think women coming into the field and challenging the healthcare system to make it more just and humane. If this film can be part of that, kind of a broader vision of humane healthcare, healthcare for the people, and to pay tribute to people who do this work. I mean, that has been, I think, the most meaningful part of it is that these are incredible people with, I think, an ethical commitment to provide care that we can learn something from in other areas, how to fight the right, these very conservative people, and there are lessons to be learned from people who do this kind of work, have hard jobs. Mm-hmm. And I hope that people learn from them. I think they're thoughtful, insightful, interesting people. And so for me, it was the tribute to that. I think that's been the most meaningful.
Gotcha. So I'd also like to just leave the audience with what you're working on now, just so they could maybe catch your film. You just tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, we're finishing post-production on a 2-part film called Necessity, Oil, Water, and Climate Resistance. And it's also about the difficult work of climate resistance, and it follows lawyers working with activists led by frontline indigenous communities who are engaged in civil disobedience or direct action, and the use of the necessity defense at trial. So each part centers on a trial that unfolds where activists use this legal strategy. And I think in the climate movement also, there's not enough attention to how people navigate the law. So I'm always looking as a filmmaker, what is the area that perhaps is less attended to? I mean, we know about the horrors of what's now called the climate emergency, but how communities are coming together and using legal strategies, including indigenous lawyers, are also featured to confront that crisis. So that's also clearly a hot topic, right, that we have to get our arms around pretty quickly.
Definitely. Well, thank you for sharing that. And they can find out more about you on your website, which is what, Jan?
Yeah, jhaaken.com, JHAAKEN.com. And the Necessity Part 1 is available now for educators and for screenings. We've had, I think, 250 teachers over the last 6 months have shown it in their classes around the country, and but we hope to have a broader distribution soon for both parts.
Fingers crossed. Well, Jan, thanks so much for, obviously time just went by. Thanks so much for joining us. But before we finish, I got just a couple announcements, and I got to give away that gift card. But before I get to that, I just want to thank you for making the film. Thank you for sharing it with us and taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you.
So, just real quick, next we screen a film every month. This next month for Pride Month, we're screening Making Sweet Tea on Tuesday, June 29th at 7 p.m. Check out our website for more information. We also have a few upcoming workshops in June, including My Life on Video for adults 55 plus, budgeting for documentaries and documentary fundraising. Again, check out our website or follow us on social media. All right, and now, as promised, we're going to give away this $25 gift certificate. Jan, you get to be with us as we give it away. This is thanks to Navjot Singh from Spy Street. He's donated a $25 gift card. Miriam, who's behind the scenes, will bring up my fancy technology here, which is this wheel of names. And so we just click this button, and here we go. We wait for it to stop spinning. And the winner this month is, where's it going to land? Camilo. All right. Camilo, congratulations. I'll email you about the gift certificate. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us. Thank you, Jan. I hope to see you again at another Docs in Progress event. And until then, stay safe. Good night, everybody.